right on. Cool. So 3, 2, 1, and we are here with Jody Chaffee. How are you, Jody?
I'm doing great, Andres. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Oh, it's great to have you. And if we can start telling us a little bit about your background, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So, my husband and I met each other at church, and we immediately moved away from our family. And for the last uh, almost 14 years, we've lived away from our families and trying to start our own journey and everything like that. But by trying to figure things out, I mean, we started out with the same values, and we loved each other, and we knew everything. Like we felt like everything was going to be great because we had the same kind of values. But soon after we got married, we got kind of lost in what our goals and what our vision for the future was going to be. And we kind of fell into feeling lost because we didn't know what we were going to do for our careers and schooling and stuff like that. Because we moved away to go to school, you know. But anyways, so we got lost in figuring out what we were supposed to do with our lives. But in the meantime, we were growing our family and we were trying to make ends meet, and fell into kind of a life of like depression and survival mode, like going just chaos, you know, just putting out fires, just surviving. So anyways, in April, my husband, after a long fight with trying to figure out what he was going to do with his career path, we agreed that he was going to leave his job and we were going to work on building a business together. And we sold our home and our second car, and we moved in with my parents, and we decided to just take the leap of faith to grow this business. And so we have 4 little kids, and we homeschool them, and we are just living on faith and hope and trust to support each other through this journey. So that's us.
Wow, that's amazing. And what was one of the first kind of signals that you at the beginning of all of this when you guys moved away and everything, that the first kind of signals that you said, hey, like this is like something's not right here. What did you?
Well, like I mentioned, we were students, and you know, growing up, we're told all of our lives, like if you just go to the right school and you pick the right, you know, marketable degree, and then and you do well in school, then the jobs are going to be available to you. You know, like you're like set for the rest of your life. But when we started going to university, so we both gotten associate's degrees to get our general education out of the way, and when we started going to university, we both were kind of like, wait, what am I going to major in? What do I want to do for the rest of my life? Because what you do in school is like what you're going to do for the rest of your life. That's the culture we grew up in, you know, the belief system that we had. So first of all, we went to university without a plan. That was like the first indication that it was like, wait, we needed a plan, you know. But then and we started to feel a lot of anxiety and stress over what the rest of our lives were going to look like. And then after my husband got his bachelor's degree, and we moved to Washington, D.C. And that was like mistake number 2, because Washington, D.C. is like the most expensive area of the United States, maybe outside of Silicon Valley, but it's really ridiculously expensive. So we were young and students, and we were growing our family, and we felt completely alone and isolated because we were not really like a lot of the people in that area, and we were forced to kind of live above our means because we were just kids, you know. And so that was the third main indicator, was like the trajectory that we were on was like we were going to be stuck in a life of debt and anxiety, because that was the only thing that we felt trapped there, because my husband was looking for jobs, and it was during the recession. He just couldn't find any jobs. And so yeah, those were the 3 main indicators that we were just kind of scratching our head going, wait, what did we get ourselves into? You know, because we just didn't start out with a plan. And so those are definitely strong indicators that the future was going to look kind of bleak.
Gotcha. Wow. Yeah. I'm sure, you know, going back through these moments is like, when you start noticing these like painful moments, it's like it's so difficult to kind of at that point, it's like so hard to see the future, I guess. And so for
Yeah.
you, what started saying like, okay, we can change something, and what do we start, how do we start changing something, and kind of how did that start looking like for you?
Yeah, it was kind of scary for a long time because, after when my husband was trying to look for jobs and nothing was panning out, we felt stuck because even though we wanted to change, we wanted to, maybe cut our losses and start over, but we knew that was going to be, we felt like that was like an attack on us. Like we felt ashamed of, quitting or going to live with our parents or, things like that, which is really ironic now. But we live with my parents. But, we were so scared, and it took us, just years of just that desire for change. We really wanted to have that desire. So I started working on myself and figuring out what I could do for my internal work to change and to grow and to adapt or figure out what I could do to overcome, because I was experiencing like real depression and loneliness. And in that time frame, my sister walked out of my life, which was really hard because it was like she was my best friend at the time. And so I was like, I got to do something about this. And we were raising small kids. And I just thought, what can I do to ensure that my kids don't go through this same struggle and have a thriving family? Because I've known families that it seemed on the outside like they were happy and healthy. And then next thing you know, it's over and they're getting a divorce, or, you find out that there was some deep seated pain in their family that caused them to crumble from the inside out. And so I really wanted to avoid that. Even though my husband and I had a really strong relationship, we loved each other and we wanted to work it out together, I'd seen families that you didn't know what they were going through. And so then they were alone and had to deal with this struggle themselves. And then they just couldn't withstand that pressure. And so I started doing the internal work. I started reading a lot of parenting books and self-help books and business books, and these kinds of things that I really felt like drawn to study, especially because when I was growing up as a kid, my parents would read a lot of those kinds of books. And I actually did attend a couple of like self-help courses with my parents when I was in high school. So like that was just something that was normal to me. So I just started doing a lot of deep diving, a lot of internal work to figure out what I wanted. And I also wanted to search out different options for our family, because I saw how much my husband was suffering, because it felt like a personal attack on him every time he'd get a rejection letter from a job he'd applied to. It was really, really hard. And I just saw his, psyche just dipping ever deeper and deeper into depression. And it was really hard to witness, and it was a burden on our family, knowing that we were both sinking deeper and deeper because of the strain on our mental health and on our finances and everything like that. So that's where it started, was just doing that research, doing that internal work to just figure out what I needed to do in order to overcome this, and to seek out just resources of people who had maybe overcome like depression and things like that. And also to learn about what grace looks like and what compassion looks like, because I think that a lot of us grow up in a culture, like a shame culture, you know what I mean? Where if like failure or doing something that's off the beaten path is like, what are you doing? Shame on you for failing, or shame on you for making a mistake or having flaws. I think that's a lot of where families fall apart, is because they're afraid of coming out and saying, well, we're struggling, or we're having a problem, or we're facing challenges, because of that shame. And so learning about that compassion and that empathy and the grace really helped me to come out of my shell, to talk about my feelings, or to recognize that my feelings were not unusual. A lot of people are struggling with depression and anxiety and shame and things like that. And so that really helped me a lot. And also learning about what it takes to have a family culture led me to want to start a podcast, because heard that starting a podcast was something that you could monetize. And so I was like, oh, maybe that's something my family could use as a vehicle to get some supplement income. And then I decided that it needed to be an exploration of what family culture, a successful family culture looks like. Because going back to this idea that we grow up in a shame culture where it's not okay to make mistakes or be imperfect or things like that. Or that we're supposed to follow this particular path of, go to school, get a job, and, things like that, and have a family, and blah, 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 X, Y, and Z, that if you're not following like a particular path, are you really succeeding? Well, that's something I wanted to understand. What does real success look like? And so I really started diving into that concept of what a successful family is, why they're successful, and how to achieve those goals and implement them into your family systems. That was a lot, but
oh, that's
really
awesome.
something that I've been doing a lot of that kind of internal work.
Yeah. And what was one of the first events that you went to for personal growth? What was one of those first events?
I started going to homeschool conferences and going online to look at homeschool conferences and meeting other parents who were living intentionally as far as education for their family goes. So those were like the first really big things that I started going to. And then I started attending just digital summits, virtual summits for businesses and things like that, or I don't know, it was more informal things that I really studied to, listening to podcasts and reading books and then watching summits and webinars and things like that were a lot of things that I consumed.
And as coming out of this, do you think, one of the biggest things that helped you start learning about that you could actually overcome depression? And because I think, as a physician, there is such a big misconception about depression and all sorts of myths, and a lot of times the marketing that we receive as doctors and patients is almost like this is a disease that you have, and this is like the thing that you will be until you die, and
Right.
And it's not true. And so what was one of the first insights that you started gaining to empower yourself uh, as to how to start kind of crawling out of this big uh, place that you were at?
Yeah, I think that I started to become more and more self-aware of how I was perceived, because I think, when you're in depression, you believe that you're not worth anybody's time and attention. You're not worth anything, and you start to isolate yourself and believe that nobody cares, that doesn't matter. But then I started to have this self-awareness that I was projecting my feelings onto other people and the way that they were treating me. And I started to learn that the people who need love the most are often the people who are hardest to love. And that because I was projecting my feelings onto other people, I was becoming that person that was really difficult to love. But I don't think that that's an excuse for anybody outside of, what on the outside looking in at what people who are depressed. That's not a good enough excuse. That's not a reason not to show love for them. I think that it's in fact because I was demonstrating this like animosity towards people in some ways. I wasn't like harsh or angry or anything like that, but I didn't go out of my way to like appreciate people or anything like that. And so, but when I became more self-aware, I started realizing that it was difficult to want to get to know me or understand me because I was really closed off from people. And so that was a really big realization, starting to become more self-aware of when I was feeling that way, starting to become more self-aware of when the things that were triggering me to start to pull away from people and things like that. It took us moving away from Washington, D.C. really to help me to realize that, because that's a really hard place to thrive if you already feel these negative things. And when we moved further south, there's a lot of Southern culture of people who are really friendly. And at first I was like, what do you want from me? I was really like, I, I was like, whoa, you're overwhelming me. This is cute, like social overload. And I started to like put people off, but they were so persistent that I started to realize that, wow, maybe there is something about me that's okay, that there's something about me that's lovable, or something. um and so it helped me to be, again, have that more of that self-awareness of going, maybe there's something that I can develop. And that's when I actually started my podcast, was using the negative energy or the pent up um just need or desire to do something with all of this built up inside of me. Having that outlet was really, really powerful for me. And I started to learn that we aren't meant to just endure our trials and our struggles. We're not meant to just sit and wait for somebody else to like deliver us the magic pill that's going to get us out of what we're feeling or doing. But we are meant to use what we learn and what we experience as an opportunity to do something about it, in our own way that we feel like we can. If the depression is so strong that just getting up in the morning is hard, then just lay and read things that are uplifting. First, that's like, do things that are inspiring, even if it's just consuming inspiring things at first, and then start doing things that are proactive and empowering. Because doing the podcast is really hard. It was so hard. Like I'm an introvert and really struggled to like talk to strangers. But I knew that this was something that I needed to do. I felt called to do it. And every time I got on the call with somebody, I was completely lit up and energized and excited. And even if I'd been like crying my eyes out right before the interview, and even if the next day I was like, oh man, this is so hard, I knew I had another interview scheduled, and then I would do that. And just getting out of myself, doing something that was empowering and inspiring has really transformed my life. So that could be anything to anybody, like whatever it is that you feel like inspired by, like just give it a try.
Yeah, you made me think of so many things. My wife is from a small town, and I was surprised about how authentic and open they are. I've lived in an island. I grew up in a big city in Colombia. And so it's a big city type of vibe, which is great. I love it. But then I moved to an island, and so for some part of my life, and I learned that small town community where everybody knows everything about you, and so it's almost like there's nothing to hide. People know each other, and I think in that small town, or like the South, because I lived in Alabama too, like there is something to be said about that. Of course, everything has their own extremes, but like people kind of, they're like, hey, so how are you? What are you up to today? And like at the beginning, it's like, whoa, like what do you want from me? But then like it's like it's okay, because then if you're going through a hard time, for me, when you're saying all of the things that you're saying, like it hit me in so many levels, because some of the hardest times in my life, when I look back to piece them back together, it was like a phone call from a brother, or a phone call from a friend, or my wife at the time. It was my fiance, and when she came, and like this support, and if
Yeah.
we close ourselves thinking like, oh, no, 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 they're gonna push me away because they're gonna think that I'm not worthy after making this mistake, or um, then we kind of isolate ourselves, and it's just worse, and it just makes down this spiral, and it's just
Yeah.
worse and worse and worse. um, and so everything that you're saying is so true. And then how did you start putting these into, and realizing that maybe, um, how did you start coming up with the idea of having like family culture? I love that idea, because we think about company culture, and,
Hmm.
and it's been recently in the past years that I've kind of start, uh, similar concept, is not the way that you put it, but started kind of triggering that within you?
Well, I started to realize that we were on, my family, my husband and I were on in this path that we were on because of the culture we'd grown up with. We were told all our lives that things would just kind of work out, that things would piece together as we just lived our lives and tried to do the right things. And so we kind of got into this mindset of just like coasting. Because I learned that every family has a culture, but most of us have a culture by default. It's just what we grew up with. It's what our parents did, our grandparents did. And we don't learn that we can change that, or that we can do things intentionally. You know, there's this, I read The Secret Garden with my kids, and there's this part in the book where, you know, she'd grown up in India with somebody who was dressing her, you know, Mary, quite contrary. She was always being dressed. She never dressed herself. But then when her parents died and she moved to England, she expected the maid to dress her. And she said, well, why would you think that? And she's just, I don't know. The nannies always said it was just the custom. It was just the custom. So a lot of times we don't question our customs. We don't question those things that we're just ingrained in us to do until something happens and we realize that doesn't work. We can't continue to exist that way. And so the first was that we could coast through life, was our culture, our customs growing up, you know, that if we just check off the right boxes of school, job, you know, family, all these things that culturally are acceptable things, then we would be happy. The second thing that we grew up in is this shame culture or fear-driven culture, that we are always being driven by the pressure to perform or the fear of failure. And those things are going to always lead us and drive us to depression and anxiety because they're fear-driven. And what I began to realize and to learn was that staying on this course that we were told would always lead to quote unquote success was fear-driven. Because if we wanted to deviate and try something different that was against the status quo, it was scary. And we were always told that would be risky, you know. But I started studying things into like entrepreneurship and, you know, studying homeschooling and things like that are against kind of what's normal in our culture. And I started realizing that the things that we think of as normal is really what's toxic. You know, because we're caught in this trap of a shame cycle and a fear cycle that if we wanted to break away from what's normal, then you're going to be alone, or you're going to be, you're not going to succeed. You know, you're going to be in poverty, or your kids are going to be unsocialized and weird and on all these things. Like there's all this stigma around quitting your job before you're ready, or there's all the stigma around having your kids home to be homeschooled, and it's all fear driven. It's all fear based. But what I came to realize and value more than fear, because when we base our decisions off of fear, then we're always just gonna be running away from our fears. You know, if you ever watch like a horror movie where they're running and they're always looking over their shoulder, you know, and then they run straight into the bad guy, right? Because they were never looking ahead, you know? And so we're driven by anxiety and fear, and that just leads to all kinds of negative things. But when we have a plan going forward, or there's something that we're reaching towards, like in the comment that I posted on Facebook earlier, I think you liked it, about somebody who's their child is being bullied at school. And a lot of the comments were just pull her out of school and get her away from the bully situation. But my belief is that it's more important to figure out what direction you want to go towards rather than the thing you're trying to avoid, because avoidance is going to produce different results than being intentionally going towards a goal. And so that's something that I have really strongly started to value, is this, that whatever our incentives are, if they're fear driven, then you're going towards failure. You know, you're not going to ever thrive. But if they're trust driven, if they're faith driven, in the sense of, even though it's scary or difficult and I don't know what the end result is going to be, if I'm going towards something that I anticipate, then I will always succeed, because I will always have a growth mindset. I'll always be working towards something rather than just reacting to something that I'm afraid of. Because that's the other thing. Reactivity isn't going to produce the same kind of results as being proactive, And so that's when, my family, that's what we've always tried to implement with our family, and with the choices that we made to, quit our job and sell our house and move in with my parents. We looked at all of the opportunities and results that we wanted from that decision, rather than just trying to get away from the things that we were afraid of. So that was, just the things that we are working towards is what's more important than what we're trying to avoid.
Wow, so many things that you're saying are great. The first thing that I thought about was when you mentioned that moving for you was one of the key, like one of the catalysts to start making you so much better. And sometimes when you ask people, are you, if let's say that this got your health better, are you willing to do it? And some people, some of us might not be willing to change things that like our location that could majorly impact our well-being. um, and and so that's such an important lesson right there. And then the second thing that I was thinking about was, um, in terms of then fear based, and then once you started going into this more of a design part, uh, what was the first obstacle that you encountered um, when you started to say, okay, we can actually design these and then move towards it? Um, and then what was the first obstacle that you encountered?
I It's a good question. I think that what's really the major obstacle was really just, we took that leap on faith, and the obstacles, the way became the obstacle in a way. If I can explain that, it was like, even though we knew that going in this direction was the right thing to do, there's still a lot of hurdles to jump. I don't know if that makes sense. Like in the time that I've been building my podcast, every time I posted an episode, there was some technical issue. There was something to do with like my connections. There was something to do with my confidence, or whatever it was, or editing, or all these different things. But every time that I came up against these obstacles, I always viewed them as an opportunity to learn. And so when we walked away from our security, quote unquote, we didn't exactly know what the path was going to look like. We just knew that we had a vision of freedom and intentionality. And so the first obstacles were that our first attempts didn't work. There were always hurdles to jump through, or things that we needed to work out in order to figure out. And so it was really about tackling those things, figuring out what lesson we needed to learn from them, so that we could grow and just get better and get closer and closer towards that goal and that vision that we had.
Hmm. Wow. And what was one of the biggest hurdles that you can remember, that you were saying, oh man, this is too tough? What was one of the biggest things that you encountered as an obstacle?
I think that we still feel that pressure to perform and that fear of failure. It's not something that ever just goes away. And so that's been like a really big obstacle question. It's like, do we go back? Do we give up? But again, it's something that once we made the decision, even though it's really scary, it's still pretty scary. We're just like, okay, we're going to run out of money unless I start making anyway, a business thrive.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's really scary. I mean, I think that an obstacle that some people might face if they were making the change we did, moving in with our parents, would be to get along and blending, the three generations. But actually, that was something that because my parents and we just have a really good relationship, that wasn't something that we struggled with so much per se. But that the insecurity is really the biggest hurdle, and feeling like, when are things going to start to change? But we're just holding out for that hope that what we're doing is the right thing to do, and that it's our conviction that by staying with the thing that we believe is the right thing to do, that things are going to work out. Even if this is going to sound counterintuitive, but even if things don't work out, the very fact that we are living intentionally is more important to us than whether or not we are, quote unquote, making it. Just because we were that miserable. You know what I mean? It's like there are at some point when you're in pain, the pain is going to be enough that's going to propel you to make a change and compel you towards the change. And that's where we were. You know, we've seen how painful our past was, that even if we fail, it's worth it. Because we know we're living intentionally, because we know that we are working towards it together. And that to me is, you know, it's scary, but that's the risk that we are willing to take so that we can have our conscience clear and feel at peace with our decisions going forward.
Wow, yeah, that's beautiful. That's, you know, is just being able to oh, that's so good, you know, that is what other people view as success might not be the thing that is like. That's why it's like the science of success and the art of fulfillment, you know. It's like you bring that part, you know, we all bring that part that like that makes us happy, and I rather be living intentionally in something that I'm aligned with, that like living in this prison that, you know, that is not making me happy and mentally unhealthy, you know. And then so for you throughout this transition, what have been some of the um, components that you think that creating a family culture uh, can be deployed and start creating a family culture for people?
That's a great question, because that's what I really, I feel like, have uncovered in this whole journey of the things that I studied. So a family, if you can, I like to use an analogy that a family culture is, or families are a lot like going on a journey. And it could be a drive across the country, or it could be a flight on an airplane. In fact, Stephen Covey compared it to a flight on an airplane. And he said that 90% of the time on a flight, the pilot is off course. And it's that constant course correction throughout the flight that keeps them on track, going towards their direction that they're aiming towards. And that's like our families, because not every day is going to look perfect or amazing. But as long as we're going towards that destination, we're going to make it. We're going to survive. We're going to thrive. And so there are 6 components that make up a successful journey. Okay. First, it's your vehicle. Okay. So, you know, like, we're a minivan family, and that's our journey. That's what we look like. We're basically middle-class Americans with a solid faith, and we homeschool, and I have Irish heritage. You know, that's our vehicle. That's who we are. That's what we look like. That's our norms. That's what we're used to, a lot of our traditions or our family history. That's a vehicle. So that's the first one. The next 3 involve our navigation. So how do we navigate this journey on our family trip? Okay. So when you're in a road trip, you need to have your destination. Where are you going as a family? Where do you want to end up? That's a mission. When you define what your family mission is, then you have a destination of where you're going. You know, Michael and I, my husband, we knew we wanted to be together forever. Like, that was our destination. We wanted to make it through to eternity. And, but we're also learning about closer destinations. Like, if, you know, we want to be prosperous, we want to be excellent, we want our family to become you know, ministers or people who give and are faithful and trustworthy and all these kind of things. And that's our destination. The second thing is the global positioning system, right? We get in our car. One of the first things we do, we select our destination on our phone, and the GPS tells us how to get there. Well, sometimes we don't right away. We don't always get out the GPS right away. We think, oh, I know where I'm going. I know how to get there. But then maybe you don't, or maybe you get lost along the way. Well, you're going to bust out your GPS, and that's going to map out your route, how to get to your destination. And this is your family vision. Your vision involves how you're going to get there, what you want it, what it looks like. And so, like, we envision having our family together when our kids are adults around the table at Christmas time, and we're all getting along and we're all happy and healthy. So it's like, what is that picture in my mind of what a family, successful family looks like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future? That's our vision. The third thing in your navigation is your compass. What is going to keep you pointed to your true north throughout everything? It's the thing that's going to define all of your decisions that you make, because sometimes you're going to have really difficult decisions. You know, like our child comes to us and tells us they made a huge mistake. So what is the decision? Do we love our child through the mistake, or do we punish them and send them a message? Those are informed by our core values. So our core values is represented by the compass. The next section of our navigation and our journey is our maintenance. So that's not like a fun word. It's like, oh, maintenance, that sounds really boring. But there are things in our day-to-day lives, like if you want your vehicle to thrive, like if you actually have a car, you got to take it and get oil changed and tires rotated and do all these kinds of things. But our family is the same kind of way. We need to do things that maintain those relationships. And so these are systems in our family that reinforce our mission, our vision, and our values, those navigational tools. And so our communication system needs to be in place. We need to have family councils, family meetings, where we establish our roles and our values, or we establish our standards and our rules of conduct and things like that. Those family meetings are a time when you check in on how we're doing on our vision and our mission, and whether or not we're upholding our values. And so, like, coming together as a family, you're able to talk about those things and troubleshoot problems and make corrections and course changes, course adjustments, right? Like Stephen Covey talked about. And so that's the first part. And the second part of that is having quality, constructive coping strategies. So if you think about the norms that we adopt in our families, a lot of them are a reflection of how we cope with stress. So, like, for instance, if your family norm, when you come home from a long day at work or school, is to plop down on the couch and turn on the TV and tune out the world, that's actually your coping strategy. It's the way that you recover from stress. A lot of times families struggle because when they're coping with stress, and this is from my personal experience of having gone through all the stress and depression and financial stress, you know, how we cope with it is what ends up being what our family culture really feels and looks like. Because if we cope with stress by shouting at our kids, shouting at each other, if we cope with stress by binging on food or media, or we cope with stress by binging on drugs and alcohol or things like that, then that becomes really what our family culture looks like. And so our coping strategies are really vital, and we need to learn how to adopt. You know, it's not our fault, because that's the things that are our norms, right? We've watched our parents come home and drink all weekend, or, you know, whatever it is, or come home and, you know, I don't want to throw my mom under the bus, but her coping strategy was to shout at us on Saturdays to get us to clean up the house, you know, and things like that, you know. I love my mom, she's awesome. But, you know, that was one of I found myself coping that way too. When I would feel stressed out, I start shouting at my kids, like, clean up this mess. We're just, oh, this is so stressful, you know. And then actually depression and anxiety became our coping strategy while we were struggling. because we thought withdrawing would, I don't know, solve something for us or give us that recovery that we needed. But that's not healthy coping. A lot of times we adopt these destructive coping mechanisms that don't solve anything, and it deteriorates our relationships and our health. And so constructive coping strategies, like channeling your energy towards a creative outlet, or exercise, or self-care. Also, establishing clear, true boundaries is another way to cope well with the struggles that we deal with. You know, like, I think that if I learned how to say no more to some things, then I would have been able to have more confidence and less, you know, resentment about people who wanted more from me or something, or from my kids who always want. And it's like, nope, I need to set a boundary here that mom's done at a certain time, you know. And so those coping mechanisms, those coping strategies that involve being constructive, self-care, and recovery, and also boundaries are vital for the maintenance of our family culture. Because when we revert to things that are destructive, that deteriorates our relationships and our health, and soon your family culture is back to being in default rather than being designed and intentional. So yeah, so those were the 6 things that make up the family culture: vehicle, destination, GPS, compass, and then maintenance. Oh, I forgot the last one. Maintenance, maintenance is the meetings and the coping strategies. So those are 6. So those are the components that make up your family culture. And the other important component is trust, because when we are using fear tactics, then that deteriorates our family culture as well. When you have trust, then you're willing and able to put these systems into place in a constructive way rather than in a manipulative way. And so when you're working towards having that kind of trust rather than enforcing it based on fear or manipulation, then your family will thrive.
That is, I love the 6. I love the 6. I love the family council concept. And how often do you think this, or how often have you seen it that it works? Do you do it once a week or once a month, or how do you, and then how do you structure it?
It depends on the family. So we have tried in the past having family council every week. Well, we break it down also, because we have what we call our executive council, where it's just me and Michael talking to decide on things or talk things through. And we've had those as often as every day when we're really struggling. It's like, can we have a family council or, you know, executive council to talk about our feelings or our goals for the day or what I want to accomplish? Because even on a day-to-day basis, it's like, okay, I need to counsel with my husband so that we're on the same page today, or we're figuring out what we want to accomplish today. But even if it's once a week, once a month, it's whatever works for your family. And then we try to come together as a family council, and we let everybody come in, and from youngest to oldest, they talk about whatever topics they want to bring up in our family council. I've also heard of families who, anytime a topic comes up, they'll make sure to tell mom or dad, and they write it down, and they say, well, let's make sure we talk about that in our family council. Or when they sit down at dinner that night, they might bring it up then and say, hey, so-and-so had a topic that they wanted to bring up and talk about as a family. And so that's another way to have that family meeting, is to be able to just create a safe space where your kids can just bring up anything, or your parents, or as parents, you can just bring up topics that you want to discuss in a safe environment where you're not going to be reactive and things like that. You know, it needs to be a safe space where everybody feels like they can contribute and talk about what's happening. And so yeah, a family council, a family meeting can really be driving in the car with your family and somebody brings something up and you're like, really, let's talk about that, you know. Or it could be a planned meeting where you're going to sit down every week and say, all right, what's on the agenda for this week, or what's on the agenda for this meeting, and just being able to come together and talk about those things is really important. And a third kind of family counsel is the one-on-one. So having a counsel with one of your children, you know, being able to give them a safe space to talk with mom or dad in a safe environment where they can talk about their concerns, and you can encourage them on their goals, and things like that. So it's just the different ways that you can open up communication channels so that you can check in on your family systems, whether or not they're working or if anybody has concerns.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's so great. I think, in our family, we're just kind of starting to do these sort of things that kind of, like you said, the maintenance part of it. And it's created so much value. I mean, it really has. And like you said, the openness and the safety component. We do this thing in the table that like everybody shares the hardest thing from the day and the nicest thing about the day, and that's
Mm-hmm.
created such a platform like for all of us to for their teenagers to kind of know what's going on with us, and then for us to learn about them, and really for her to share with us like things that we would never talk about, and so it's created such a safe place.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. That's really awesome. It's not easy sometimes if the communication channels are clouded or the trust has been violated, and it's important to try and reestablish that trust. I've heard of people that they might set up a specific time when they're allowed to come and confess something to mom and dad and not have any punishment. Like it's
Oh, that's
safe,
cool.
that safe space, or to say, hey, sweetheart, I'm going to be in my office or in my room at this time, and it's going to become a no punishment zone for this hour only, or something like that. You know what I mean? I mean, generally we want to be able to have that safe space always, but I think knowing that to create that kind of safe space where you're not going to react is going to be so crucial, because really all that anybody wants is connection. And when our kids are struggling with something, or when we're struggling with something, that's all we crave. We just really want connection and to not be judged. I think it's so easy as parents that, we have this agenda in our minds of what a good kid looks like, or what a successful kid looks like, or whatever. And when our kids aren't necessarily meeting that expectation, we fall into judgment. Even though we love them, it's almost because because I love them, I want them to succeed, I want them to become and thrive, but the very act of judging them is what becomes their barrier. It's like, because it puts that pressure to perform and that fear of failure on them. And as parents, that's not, they want to be able to come to you. They want to be able to know that you're a safe place to come when they're struggling, or when they have questions and doubts and things. And if you are constantly triggered by what they're doing or not fulfilling your expectations and things like that, then they feel that judgment, and that closes off the communication and closes off the connection that you want to have with your family. And so it's really important to have that safe environment where they feel like mom and dad's not going to judge them, but they feel like they can come to them and talk about anything.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's so important. I think I agree with you completely on that. To be able to feel like that is not like I heard. I'm reading this book by the general, one of the Marine guys who just resigned from the government. I forget. He's a very well known general, and he said you construct the behavior, but you leave the manhood intact of the Marine. And I thought that that was so useful. And it's kind of like what you're saying. I feel so, yeah, that like, if the kid made a mistake, just like I make mistakes all the time, like to leave that manhood or that womanhood intact, like as a person, that they are capable and worthy regardless of the mistake.
Well, you'd be surprised how much, when you love them through their struggles, how much they will come around. I mean, it's interesting how, yeah, you want to shape their behavior, you want them to see their mistakes and things like that. But there's something that they have to learn from their own experience. You know, we are all agents for ourselves to choose for ourselves and to figure out life for ourselves. And as soon as we feel judged or disconnected from people who love us, then that begins to create a pocket of shame that we want to hide. But as soon as we feel like we're loved, then exposing that shame and creating connection, it can't thrive. It can't. And so, you know, allowing that space where your children feel loved, they will grow and they will become more of who we envision for them to be faster than if we were to try to force it or try to push them into it. And even if they don't, they still just want to be loved and have that connection with you. And you never know, they might grow up to be somebody that you can't envision or imagine who they're going to become. But when you give them that freedom, then they'll establish that. One of my favorite quotes is Johann Sebastian von Goethe is his name. I can't pronounce his name right. Anyways, what he says is, there are two things parents should give their children: roots and wings. So when we establish a foundation for our kids to grow in security and safety, and also with a secure identity, there are studies that prove that when children know their parents' stories or their ancestors' stories, that creates resilience because they have an identity in who they are and where they've come from. So that foundation of safety and identity creates those roots, but then giving them that freedom and the space to know that they have your love and connection provides them with those wings to be able to become who they're meant to be.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great quote. And Jody, what is next for you? What is next for you?
You know, I'm working on sharing this message some more. You know, that's really, I feel like it's kind of like my calling in a way to share this with people and to help people who are struggling to find this balance between, you know, life and family, or building a business and family, or people who want to make some kind of transition or who have made some kind of transition. And they, you know, when you make this change, there's no handbook or script for what the future looks like. And so I think a lot of times when we're making these kinds of changes and we're just searching for, okay, what is next? Because all my life I'd been told, okay, go to school, get a job, this is what's next, what's next, what's next. But then at some point we hit a wall where we're going, I don't know what's next anymore. What do I do? And what I want to help people to find and to realize is that they can write for themselves what's next. The pages of our lives are blank, right? Like we've written, you know, every time we turn the page, we write a new page. And that's okay to write our story and be in the, you know, in the mess of our stories, and have a vision and an idea or a mission of what the rest of the story may look like. And I think a lot of people don't know that, or they feel like that's too scary. You know, that it's scary. And so I want to help people to figure out that, you know, it's okay. It's okay to write the next step, the next page, or the next chapter in your life and your story, and not necessarily take reference from what was happening in your past or in your family's past, but that the future can be what you create.
I love that when you said that. It's like just we hear this all the time, but somehow the way that you said it, that we're writing that book, we're writing the next page, we're writing, and so that's so important. Well, Jody, thank you so much. And then if people want to hear more or learn more about how to build family culture, where can they go?
So my podcast is at ourmodernheritage.com. So yeah, our modern heritage. And but my handle on Instagram is Family Culture Podcast, and that's also where you can find me on Facebook. But yeah, that's really a reflection of understanding that we can create a new heritage, even if we take some, we might learn from our heritage from the past, but we're also creating a new heritage for our future. And so that's what the basis of the title came from, our modern heritage.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jody. I so
Thank you.
appreciate it. So appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And so
Have a
I'd
good
love
time.
to, yeah, do one next year and see where everything is going.
Great. That would be awesome.
Okay. Awesome. All righty.
Awesome. Thank you.